In the 1950s, Berlin was the most dangerous city on Earth, one city, split between enemies who could see each other across the street. To the west, it was a fragile island of freedom. To the Soviets, a window straight into the heart of their occupied empire. Berlin sat more than 100 miles inside Soviet-controlled territory, a lone Western outpost marooned deep behind enemy lines, watched on every side. American spies had a problem. The Soviets had stopped talking on the radio and moved their secrets underground onto buried telephone lines no one could hear. Their best ears had gone deaf. Every Soviet order, troop move, and battle plan now traveled through cables they simply could not reach. Western generals were flying blind. If the Red Army was massing for a surprise attack, the first warning the West might get could be the tanks themselves. Then one officer asked an outrageous question. If we cannot reach the cables from above, why not reach them from below? The plan was lunacy. Dig a secret tunnel out of the American sector, under the border, and surface directly beneath the Soviets' own phone lines. It had a name. The Americans called it Operation Gold. The British, who joined the scheme, called it Operation Stopwatch. No tunnel this long had ever been driven in secret beneath a hostile city. The engineers would be writing the rulebook as they dug, with an enemy army walking overhead. Two of the world's great spy services would pool their money, their engineers, and their nerve on a single, reckless bet. The target sat just a few hundred meters inside enemy ground, a junction where 3 Soviet cables carried the secrets of an entire army. If it worked, the West would be listening to the Red Army's every word from inside its own switchboard. If it failed, it could start a war. They would be caught, red-handed, tunneling into Soviet territory. So in the autumn of 1953, in a quiet room in London, a handful of men gathered to plan the most audacious wiretap in history. One of them was a traitor. The dig began in a flat, ordinary field on the edge of the American sector, beside a place no one would question, a brand new U.S. Army warehouse. The warehouse was a lie. It was never meant to store anything. It existed to hide a hole and to swallow the mountain of earth the tunnel would produce. Engineers had to remove over 3,000 tons of soil, without a single truck leaving the site to give them away. They lined the tunnel with heavy steel rings, inching forward beneath the border, terrified of the sound carrying up to the surface above. Every meter took them deeper into enemy ground. A collapse, a stray sound, a curious patrol, any of it could end them. And they were digging blind. With no way to see their target, they navigated by careful measurement alone, aiming to surface within inches of cables buried in the dark. Then came an enemy no one had planned for: heat. The tunnel ran so warm that engineers feared it would melt the frost on the ground above, drawing a perfect, steaming line on the surface, pointing straight at their secret. So they built a hidden cooling system, fighting their own machine to keep the snow above undisturbed. Above ground, soldiers staged the dull routines of an ordinary army post, a deliberate performance of boredom to mask the most expensive hole in Europe. After months of silent labor, the tunnel reached its mark, nearly 500 meters, stopping directly beneath the 3 Soviet cables. Now came the most delicate moment of all. To listen, they had to cut into live enemy cables without the Soviets ever feeling a thing. A specialist team tapped each line, splicing in their own wires, turning the Soviets' private cables into America's loudest microphone. In May 1955, the line went live. Half a kilometer underground, beneath the feet of the Red Army, the West began to listen. What poured out of those cables was a flood, not a trickle of secrets, an ocean of them. Soviet troop movements, officer postings, the locations of their forces across East Germany, spoken aloud, captured on tape. The tap fed 300 kilometers of cable and over 1,000 separate channels, more than the team could ever hope to hear in real time. So the tapes were flown to London and Washington, where small armies of translators worked through the mountain year after year. The backlog was staggering. Conversations recorded 1 year were still being translated years later, the secrets quietly aging in their numbered boxes. They learned the Red Army's order of battle, its strengths, its weaknesses, the shape of the enemy traced from his own careless words. It paid off in the currency that mattered most, warning. For the first time, the West could read the Red Army's readiness and sleep a little easier each night. Each tape that survived the journey was numbered, indexed, and locked away, a growing library of stolen conversation. By the time it was done, they had captured nearly 500,000 conversations on 50,000 reels of tape. It was, on paper, the greatest eavesdropping operation the world had ever seen, and for 11 months, it ran perfectly. Almost too perfectly, because the men running the tunnel did not know the most important fact about it. The Soviets were not fooled, they were not surprised. They had known about the tunnel from the very beginning. They had known before the first shovel ever broke the ground. They had known the moment the plan was conceived. To understand how, we have to go back to that quiet room in London, and to the polite young man who sat in the corner, writing everything down. His name was George Blake. To the British, he was a trusted, decorated intelligence officer. To Moscow, he was their man inside the room. Years earlier, captured during the Korean War, Blake had quietly changed sides and come home a secret agent of the KGB. Blake was not bought with money. Somewhere in that freezing prison camp, he had come to believe the other side would win, and he chose it with open eyes. Now back in London and rising fast, Blake was handed the minutes of a very secret meeting, the plan for Operation Gold. Within days, every detail, the route, the target, the timing, was in Moscow. The tunnel was betrayed before a single shovel touched the earth. And here the story twists, because Moscow did something no one expected. They did nothing. To stop the tunnel would expose Blake, and a spy that valuable was worth more than any secret the cables might leak. So the KGB made a cold decision: let the West dig, let them tap, let them listen, and protect the traitor at all costs. His handlers treated him like treasure, meeting him in secret, feeding him just enough, never once risking the one man they had placed inside British intelligence. For 11 months, the Soviets let their enemies celebrate a triumph that Moscow had owned from the very first day. But there was a question that haunted the analysts later. If Moscow knew, was anything on those tapes even true? The answer is the strangest part of all. Most of it was real. The KGB had hidden Blake so deeply that even their own army was never warned. To keep one spy safe, Moscow let genuine military secrets flow to the West for nearly a year, a price they were willing to pay. And then, after 11 months, Moscow decided the game had run long enough. It was time to find the tunnel, by accident, of course. On a rainy night in April 1956, Soviet signalmen stumbled onto the tap, blaming a fault in the cables and the heavy spring rain. They followed the wires down and found themselves staring into a gleaming American tunnel running back under the border. The Soviets expected to humiliate the West. They marched in foreign journalists to gawk at the spies' abandoned handiwork. In a final flourish of theater, Soviet officials served the visiting journalists refreshments inside the tunnel, turning an act of espionage into a guided tour. But the plan backfired. Instead of outrage, the world marveled at the sheer audacity and skill of it. The tunnel became a legend. So both sides simply declared victory. The Americans had pulled off the impossible. The Soviets had caught them doing it. Each told the story that suited them. Quietly, the spymasters knew the truth the headlines missed. Even betrayed from birth, the tunnel had still handed the West a mountain of genuine intelligence. For 5 more years, no one knew the truth, that the whole spectacular operation had been compromised from the start. Then in 1961, a defector handed the West a name. The trusted officer, the man in the corner, George Blake, was a Soviet spy. He confessed to betraying not just the tunnel, but countless agents and operations. A British court sentenced him to 42 years in prison. But the story was not over. In 1966, Blake did the unthinkable. He escaped over the prison wall and vanished behind the Iron Curtain. He surfaced in Moscow, a celebrated hero of the Soviet Union, decorated for the very betrayals that had cost the West so dearly. To Britain, he was the traitor who escaped justice. To Russia, a hero of the secret war. He never apologized, never wavered, and never once looked back. He lived there, untouched, for over half a century, dying in Moscow in 2020, loyal to the end, to the side he had chosen in a prison camp long before. The Berlin Tunnel remains one of the boldest feats of the Cold War, and proof that the deepest secret of all was never the tunnel. It was the man who gave it away. Thanks for watching Fathom Files. If you enjoyed this descent into history, subscribe, because there is always more buried beneath the surface.